So we this Kislev. Everybody knows the story. The stuff in the beginning of the story. Isn't such a crazy story? The Alter Rebbe came to the Mezritcher Maggid. He was either 18 or 19 years old. We know he came after Pesach. And we know that he left because he didn't like what he saw. And he went back. And when he went back the second time, he liked it. And it says in Dayan Gem, I think, that the first Maimon that he heard was a Maimon like Shabbos Nachamu, at the end of the summer. But the Alter Rebbe was either 18 or 19 when he met the Mezritcher Maggid. When the Mezritcher Maggid passed away, the Alter Rebbe was 27 years old. You hear? When the Mezritcher Maggid passed away, the Alter Rebbe was 27 years old. 27 years old. Which for me and you is young. For the Alter Rebbe, it's like a couple of 100 years old. Listen to this, Chavre. And the Mezritcher Maggid's Eres Dvoy, on his last hours, the Mezritcher Maggid was surrounded by all of his Talmidim. We know their names. The biggest Talmidim Maggid were in Mezritch. He actually passed away in a city called Rovno, and he's buried in a city called Hanepoli, the Mezritcher Maggid is. And he's surrounded by his Talmidim, I think. Before he passed, all the Talmidim were around his bed, and he spoke. He spoke. What he spoke that night was his tzavor, was his will. The Talmidim wrote it down, and they notarized it. You know, we want to make a document legal, get a notary to notarize it. The Talmidei HaMaggid who were present wrote their chsima on the bottom of the page to say that it's authentic. And on the bottom of the page, by the way, the yahrzeit of the Mezritcher Maggid is, as you know, it's Kislev. Last year, Tov Shin Pei Gimel, the 250th anniversary of the Mezritcher Maggid's Histalkus. So we made a big deal. We talked about it a lot. We ranged about it a lot. Last year was the Mezritcher Maggid's 250th yahrzeit. Lamed Gimel, Tov Kuf Lamed Gimel, Tov Reish Lamed Gimel, Tov Shin Lamed Gimel, Tov Shin Pei Gimel. Last year was 250 years of Maggid's Histalkus. So the last words on the bottom of the page were Omer Agite Nacht V'Yoshan. In the Polish Yiddish. He said Agite Nacht, not with a Vav, with a Yud. Agite Nacht, a good night, and he slept, and he apparently fell asleep. He passed away in his sleep. That's how I understand it. Elika Maggid, the Mezritcher Maggid. The tzavor is extant, we have it. Most of the tzavor was to his own son, of Avram the Malach. Included in the tzavor to his own son is the following statement. The Mezritcher Maggid told his son, Avram the Malach, on his deathbed, the following words. Sollst folgen Zalmanu Leben, wird dir ständig glücklich sein. Weil sein Machshava Rishena is a Navua Ktana. Which means in English, you should listen to Zalmanu, should live in everything, you should listen to him always. Because his first thought is a miniature prophecy. The Maggid told him from the Malach, the Alter Rebbe's first thought is a miniature prophecy. Now parenthetically, Maimon HaMuzgar, parenthesis, the Rebbe was asked how he answers questions about matters of life and death. People write to him questions about life and death, about operations, about business, about moving to new locations, about marriage. How does the Rebbe make so many decisions? How did the Rebbe make this decision? What the Rebbe answered? There's different answers, of course. But on one occasion, the Rebbe said, I say the first thing that comes to my mind. The first thing that comes to my mind is what I write. And I don't know this for a fact, but I would like to believe that this is a tradition that when the Mezritcher Maggid said about the Alter Rebbe that his first thought was a Nevuah Ktana, he didn't mean only the Alter Rebbe, he meant the Alter Rebbe and the Hemshech of the Alter Rebbe. Now, by all the Rabbeim, there was a Seder that the first thing that comes to their mind is a Nevuah. And you can trust it. So the Rebbe said, I trust my first instinct. There's actually a story that everyone told someone to do something, and then later they told him to do something else. So he told the Rebbe that last time he told me something else. He said, what I told you the first time, that's what you should do. I told you the first time, that's what you should do. So the Mezritcher Maggid told the Avram the Malach on his deathbed, listen to the Alter Rebbe and it'll be good, because his first thought is a miniature prophecy. But there's also a peach to each Talmud. He spoke to the Mendel, Vitebsker, he spoke to the Mezritcher Hanepollah. Each one gave him, and they're very beautiful. You know, I love you in 101 ways. You know, to each one a different message. Except to the Alter Rebbe. You know what the Mezritcher Maggid told the Alter Rebbe? Oh, dear Zalman, your life is going to be miserable. So he told him. You're on his deathbed. The Maggid told the Alter Rebbe, your life is going to be hard. And you're going to suffer. I just want you to know, he told him, that the Rebbe and I, that means the Baal Shem Tov and I, will always stand ready to be me'eded rachem and rabim for you and for your derech. The Mezritcher Maggid told the Alter Rebbe on his deathbed, you're going to have a very hard life. You're going to suffer a lot. But you should just know that the Rebbe and I, the Mezritcher Maggid, the Baal Shem Tov, are always going to be standing ready to me'eded rachem and rabim for you and your derech. That's the beginning of the story with this Kislev. What's the Hemshech of the story with this Kislev? Tov Kufnan Beis is 1792. We have the story with Veda Leah. You know the story with Veda Leah? The story with Veda Leah was that the Alter Rebbe in Tov Kufnan Beis was how old? Was 47 years old. The Tanya had not yet been written. The Alter Rebbe saw that he was going to pass away because of the Kepeda against him personally. He was revealing too much Chassidus. Before the Tanya was written. And the Alter Rebbe was very afraid. So one of the highlights of the Veda Leah story happened Shavuos. The story that you know of Veda Leah, that they make the songs and the plays, happened in Elul, at the end of the year. But Shavuos that year, Tov Kufnan Beis, the Alter Rebbe was sitting by his table, Yom Tov, surrounded by Chassidim. And the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim knew that when the Alter Rebbe would sit up very straight and become very earnest, that was a siman that he could see the Heilig of Baal Shem Tov in the Maggid, that his Rebbe had come into the room. And they could tell from his face, the Alter Rebbe would change his whole demeanor, that his Rebbe had come in. They could see, when the Mezritcher Maggid and the Baal Shem Tov would come into the room, obviously the Chassidim couldn't see him, but the Alter Rebbe would sit straight and become very earnest. So Shavuos Tov Kufnan Beis that year, 1792, he was sitting at the table, and the Alter Rebbe was very bitter. They could see that Alter Rebbe was very forbidden. The Alter Rebbe was very forbidden. He was very upset. And it says in the Sichos that when the Alter Rebbe was in a bad mood, all the Chassidim were in a bad mood. His mood was contagious. When he was happy, the Chassidim were happy. When he was bitter, he was forbidden gefährlich. And the Chassidim didn't know what and why and where. He hadn't told anybody. He told the Veda Leah about it at the end of the summer. This is the beginning of the summer. Alter Rebbe suddenly sits up very straight, which meant that his Rebbe had arrived. And suddenly the Alter Rebbe stands up and he says, Rebbe, Zayde, Rebbe means the Maggid. Zayde means the Baal Shem Tov. The Alter Rebbe used to call the Baal Shem Tov Zayde, always, we know the story. Your derech, your Torah is nesakona. Alter Rebbe said, your teachings are nesakona, chas v'shalom, there should be a hemshech. Zayt me'ere rachem im rabim me'hekol l'mayla me'ere rachem rabim for your derech. And there should be a hemshech of your teachings and your avodah. And the Alter Rebbe fell to the ground like a stone in a dead faint. Boom, he fell down. You can understand yourself what kind of reaction Chassidim have. Tzemach Tzedek was 2.5. It was 4 option. Tzemach Tzedek hears a bang and then a lot of commotion. So he ran to see what it was. And he sees his Zayda laying on the floor. All the Chassidim are around. He pushes his way through the Chassidim. It was 2.5. And he's screaming, Zayda, Zayda. He pushes away till the Alter Rebbe. He gets to the Alter Rebbe, and he puts his hand out. The Alter Rebbe should take his hand. The kid was this big. Zayda gives him his hand. The Alter Rebbe opens his eyes. And he gives his grandson his hand, and he allows the Tzemach Tzedek to stand him up. As, you know, he couldn't lift him. And the Tzemach Tzedek is lifting him. The Alter Rebbe mutters, Zeh Yenachamenu. This little boy is our Nechama. This happened, Tov Kuf Nun Beis. And you all know the end of that story, that the Alter Rebbe saw that someone has to pass away, but he wanted to win the Kitrug without anybody passing away. And he confided in the Veda Leah. The Alter Rebbe had a lot of people who couldn't fight it. You know, he confided in his daughter, second daughter. He had an older daughter. It tells you who the Veda Leah was. She passed away at 26. We know nothing about her, except for this story. But the Alter Rebbe confided in her, which the Alter Rebbe felt that she's the most trustworthy person to confide such a pneumistic thing. And he told her, I could solve it al yedei chiluf. I could solve it by somebody passing away instead of me, but I don't want. I want everybody to live. In fact, we know that the Alter Rebbe had a friend who was much older than him. He was a very, very famous tzaddik, Reb Nachum Chernobyler. He was still alive at that point. And the Alter Rebbe sent a picture to Reb Nachum Chernobyler for the Meir Rachim for this. And the Seder by the Chernobyler was that he used to take Pidyanis in mikveh. He would go into the mikveh. I'm assuming he was wearing a yarmulke, and you would hand him the pidyon. He'd read the pidyonos in the mikveh. He went into the mikveh at Rosh Hashanah. I don't know what year it was. It must have been Tavkuf in the base. Maybe in the Gimel. He refused to take pidyonos. He refused. And the Chassidim were waiting. He's waiting. Until the Shliach of the Alter Rebbe came, the first pidyon he took, he waited for the Alter Rebbe Shliach. The first pidyon he took, the Alter Rebbe Shliach. The Shliach of the Alter Rebbe ran in and said, I have a pidyon from the Alter Rebbe. The Nachum Shlomo read the pidyon, and he said to the Shliach, tell him I can help him. Al Yedei Chiluf. That someone should pass away instead of him. So the Shliach came back to the Alter Rebbe and told the Alter Rebbe what the Shlomo said. And the Alter Rebbe said, Al Yedei Chiluf, but you can't allein. That someone should pass away instead of me, that I could have done by myself. I didn't want Al Yedei Chiluf. And then, of course, the end of the story was that Aleya made a bezdin, right? You know the story. She passed away, said the Alter Rebbe. This was Tov Kuf Beis. Now you fast forward 7 more years. It's Tov Kuf Tes, 1798. After Simchas Torah, Alter Rebbe is arrested. And he's thrown into a dungeon. Alter Rebbe was Pasha thrown into a dungeon. Mamish into a dungeon. There was no windows. There's no way to know if it was day or night. And we were very confused about the story because he was arrested twice. And a lot of stories, you're not sure it happened the first time and the second time. The first time Alter Rebbe was arrested, the government of Russia arrested him. They mamish did not know why. They didn't know why. They arrested Alter Rebbe without knowing why they arrested. How do you arrest a person? I don't know why you're arresting him. Because this was a theocracy. It wasn't a democracy. It was a monarchy. It was a dictatorship. A man who till this day no one knows who he is, named Hirsch ben Baruch, who lived in Vilna, wrote 2 letters to the government, and Famasha the Mountain Rebbe. Here, we don't even know who Hirsch ben Baruch is. When Alter Rebbe was sitting in jail, they asked him, do you know Hirsch ben Baruch? And Alter Rebbe made a list of all the Hirsches he knows, all the Ben Baruchs he knows, but he doesn't know a single Hirsch ben Baruch. We don't know Ada Yeh Mazeh, who Hirsch ben Baruch is. He wrote 2 letters, Famasha the Mountain Rebbe, and they arrested Alter Rebbe in case, just in case. They didn't even know why. And they threw him in a dungeon. 2 years later, he was invited a second time. This time he didn't come with a chariot. They invited him to come back to board. And he was treated much more respectfully. He stayed in a government accommodations. He wasn't in a dungeon. He was pushed in a hotel, a private hotel that the government had. And he was questioned. But the first time when he was in jail, the questions were asked by the government. And Alter Rebbe was very easily able to answer them. The second time, the questions were asked by Avigdor, the Rav of Pinsk, who was the head of the Misnagdim. He was a big Talmud Chacham, and he also was he hated Chassidim and Chassidus, and the Alter Rebbe had to answer him. So we know in our tradition that the first arrest looked worse, the second arrest was much more dangerous. Because even though the second time he was treated with respect, but the Misnagdim were asking the questions. And the Misnagdim knew how to ask. And the Alter Rebbe had to defend Chassidus against Avigdor. In the documents which we now have, he's called Chaimovich, Ben Chaim. Avigdor's last name, everybody in those days, your last name was your father's name. Alter Rebbe was Baruchovich, because his father's name was Baruch. Avigdor's father's name was Chaim, so he's called Chaimovich. You can see in the documents. It's Baruchovich and Chaimovich. He asked Alter Rebbe answers. So he was arrested twice. But the first time he was put in a dungeon where you put common criminals. And while he was in the dungeon, his cell room was very, very, very small. He was visited by the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid. The Rebbe told the story by Fabrengen. It's in the base Rebbe, but the Rebbe told from Fabrengen, which means it's a true story. The story goes that the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid came in together. Now the Baal Shem Tov, the Alter Rebbe had seen the Baal Shem Tov as a 3-year-old. He never saw him again. By his upshed, the Baal Shem Tov cut his hair, and after that the Baal Shem Tov never saw the Alter Rebbe, because the Alter Rebbe was not allowed to see the Baal Shem Tov. He was supposed to be a Talmud of his Talmud. The Alter Rebbe was supposed to be the 3rd generation, or the 2nd generation. When they came in, the Baal Shem Tov said to them as a Chamagin, Zogem as Zogem Teda, commanded to say Teda. The Baal Shem Tov was not the Alter Rebbe's Rebbe, so he couldn't tell him what to do. But the Baal Shem Tov was the Mezritcher Maggid's Rebbe. So he commanded the Mezritcher Maggid to command the Alter Rebbe, who was his Chassid, his Talmud, that he should say Teda. So the Alter Rebbe said Teda. And when he finished, the Baal Shem Tov said to the Maggid, he repeats it exactly the way I taught it to you. Although the Baal Shem Tov spoke in one language, the Mezritcher Maggid spoke in a different language. The Mezritcher Maggid spoke the language of Kabbalah. The Alter Rebbe spoke in a 3rd language. He spoke the language of philosophy, of Chakira. The Baal Shem Tov said to the Maggid, he's repeating the Teiros the way exactly I taught him to you. And then the Alter Rebbe asked his Rebbes, why am I sitting in jail? And they told him, you're sitting in jail because you're spreading too much Chassidus. You're revealing too much Chassidus. Too much Primus HaTeira. And the world is not ready for it, the world is not using it correctly, whatever the particulars are. So the Alter Rebbe said, so then I'll stop. I'll stop. And he said, oh, no. Now that you started, and you went to jail, if you successfully get out of here, you should reveal even more. If you successfully get out of here, you should reveal even more. Now that you were arrested, and the whole reason for the arrest was because you mefarsim Primus HaTeira, too much Chassidus, if and when you get out of here, you should reveal even more Chassidus than you're revealing until now. And as a Maimer Amuz, I'll tell you, there was a Yid who was a very big menaged of Alter Rebbe, a very big critic of Alter Rebbe. He was a Chassidish Rebbe. His name was the Baruch of Mezherbush. Have you heard the name of Baruch of Mezherbush? He was the Baal Shem Tov's grandson. He was Baal Shem Tov's daughter's son, the Baruch of Mezherbush. He was a very, very, very holy man. Very, very big tzaddik. He was also a very, very big critic. You know who his arch nemesis was? No, he picked on the most. His sister's son. Do you know who the Baruch of Mezherbush's sister's son was? Reb Nachman Braslev. Reb Nachman Braslev, his mother was Fege. Fege was the Baruch Mezherbush's sister. Nachman ben Fege. He made his nephew crazy. He made his nephew Meshuggah. He's the Gereid of Atcharma. But he was also very critical of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe went to meet him, face to face. And there was a chassid with the Alter Rebbe who said that the meeting got so heated that at one point he thought they would physically beat each other up. Physically fight. The Alter Rebbe and the Baruch Mezherbush, two tzaddikim gemurim. So he stepped between the two of them. He stepped between them, the Pinchas Reizes. And the Alter Rebbe told him later, you have no idea what you just did. Like, how do you get in between two tzaddikim gemurim and Har Pasha, Yain Kavinu fights with the Malach HaVesav? You don't want to get between them, you understand what I'm saying? The Pinchas Reizes got in between the Alter Rebbe and the Baruch Mezherbush. That's how heated it got. And the Alter Rebbe said to him, if I don't love you as much as I love you, you would have been out of here. Finished. And the Baruch Mezherbush said to the Alter Rebbe, "Favos bist du gegangen in Peterburg? Hast das gegent a Ribbergain behavoras hayad halametzach? Why would your life have to be arrested and go to Petersburg? You could have gone through that whole pasha by doing this, running on with your forehead." And the Alter Rebbe said, you got to go through it. You know why you got to go through it? Because the point of going through it is to win, to bring Chassidus to the world. So the Alter Rebbe's Rebbe said to him, if and when you get out of here, you should reveal Chassidus even more than revealing until now. This is what happened. And that's talking the story. Alter Rebbe came out of jail, and he started revealing Chassidus Shaloi Be'erech that he did before. There's a famous sikha from the Rebbe Rashab. It is Kislev. I think Samach. That's a famous sikha from the Rebbe Rashab, where the Rebbe Rashab started the Fabrengen. It's Kislev with these words. Ich denk, als de Ike die Futsa Manasecha Chutza hat sich angeheben nach Peterburg. It's my belief, the Rebbe Rashab said, that the primary idea of spreading Chassidus to the outside begins after Peterburg. The Rebbe came out of jail. That's when he first started to reveal Chassidus in a full Chabad way. What that means is simple words. I don't know if it's simple. What that means is that before Peterburg, to understand Chassidus, it wasn't enough to have a good head. You had to have a good soul. You had to have a sensitive neshama. Otherwise, it makes sense to you. After Peterburg, Chassidus was brought into the world to such an extent that if you're smart, you can understand it. Chassidus, Chabad, Lahavdal, Elf Avdals, you're not allowed to say it, but I'm saying it anyway, a goy can understand. Because as spiritual as it is, and as edel as it is, it's real seichel. The Alter Rebbe took God, and he packaged him in the human mind. That the human brain can hold the Eibush in his understanding. That phenomena, that the human mind is a keli for Lakus, begins after Peterburg, like it says in Ayem Yem. What does it say in Ayem Yem? Anybody know?
Which one?
The one that I want. That the Alter Rebbe is the ultimate Mechaya Mason. The ultimate resurrector of the dead is the Alter Rebbe. So with the human, there's nothing more dead than the cold mind. And the Alter Rebbe made the cold mind that keli for Lakus. Made the cold mind that keli for Getlachkeit. That idea begins be'ikid after Alter Rebbe went out of jail. Go ahead.
Can you explain what the idea of a kitcher is? Like, there was something wrong about it, or? like it was right, but it was just a new thing?
I want to tell you something. My brother and I, have a memory, and since Simchas Torah, since this war started, I've been thinking about it, I don't know. We had a doctor, lived in Crown Heights, on Carroll and Kingston. He was not from, maybe his name was Weissman. And he was our doctor for a few years. My mother changed doctors because he would harass us. We lived in Crown Street, a couple blocks away. And a lot of times my mother couldn't take us, she had a lot of little kids, Baruch Hashem, she couldn't take us to the doctor. We went ourselves. If we went with our mother, he behaved. But when we came along, he would ask us, how come God gave the Arabs the oil? I was a little boy, it's 1970, I was a bishop. And this doctor would ask me, he was angry. How come God gave, he wasn't being cute, he was frustrated. But he didn't ask my father, he asked me. I was 9, my brother was 8. And he harassed us. Every time we went to the doctor, he would pour out his anger at the Eibishter on 2 little boys. And I would imagine that all the other kids who went to the doctor, every time we came to the doctor, how come God gave the Arabs the oil to the Arabs? And my mother changed that. It was so bad. It didn't happen once. It was so bad that we had to change doctor. He was a good doctor. He helped me when I was once very ill. He was a good doctor. There was a mishuganer. He harassed little kids. How come God gave the Arabs the oil to the Arabs? When I was I remember telling the story to a teenager, and someone told me that the Rebbe said that there's a reserve of oil in Etisol, which is even greater than the Arabs have. And there's a rumor now that they found natural gas, not oil, but natural gas, in huge volumes in the Mediterranean, which Israel is claiming, and it's apparently also very, very, a lot, lucrative. How come? So I'm asking you a question. The Eibishter created the world, is in charge of the world. How come it doesn't look that way? What is the answer? Does anybody know the answer to the question? Huh?
That's how he wants it to be.
Because that's what God wants. The same God who created the world and the control of the world wants to make it look bad. Why? He wants to look like a loser? Because Hashem wants to win. A fair fight. Not an unfair fight, a fair fight. So the Eibishter is smart enough to fight against himself and make it fair. Zeh l'uma zeh also l'kim. The Eibishter created zeh l'uma zeh.
No, so my question is like the kitcher a klipa thing, or is like a ruchnius to get like kedusha type of kitcher?
Both. It's the same.
It's different.
No, it's not. It's only different because you forget that there's only one God. If there'd be 2 gods, you'd be right. There's only one God. The Eibishter brings kedusha in the world through tzaddikim. And when tzaddikim bring kedusha into the world, you know what makes it hard? The Eibishter. So if you're the Alter Rebbe, and you want to reveal Chassidus, and the Eibishter says to you, listen, it's a big sakara, don't do it. What would I do? Okay, I won't do it. Well, it's your Chassidus, willst nicht, darf man nicht. But that's how the game is played. The tzaddik does what the tzaddik is told. And the Eibush does what the Eibush is going to do. And that's the way it plays out. That's a kitrug. So every kitrug has to do with klipa. And every kitrug is about kedusha. That's the way it goes. Klipa fights with kedusha, but it has excuses. Excuses that the Eibush gave klipa to fight with kedusha. How could you be against Chassidus, such a good thing? What's the answer? That the world doesn't deserve it. That the world is not using it as much as it should. So, it's a good thing. What's wrong with a good thing? What's the answer? The Eibush says you have to earn it and deserve it. Unless you earn it and deserve it, there's going to be problems. He's a funny God, this God of ours, you know? Only one thing, they think about it. There's only one problem with the Eibush. What's the problem? Anyway, what's the problem with the Eibush? Does anybody know what's the problem with the Eibush? What's the problem with the Eibush? You can't create another one. We got one. That's it. We're stuck with him. He does whatever he wants. We like what he does. We don't like what he does. Huh? That's the answer right there. You see? The answer is a fight. Hashem does whatever he wants. And what do? Not whatever he wants. Whatever he tells us. Now what if he tells us do one thing and he starts to make us trip? There was a guy, I don't know if you heard of him, he's a very famous Jew, but maybe you guys are growing up in all the Torah, you don't get the... His name was Avraham Avinu. Ever heard of Avraham Avinu? The Jews believe in him. He's the first father of the Jewish people, yeah? He was the father of the Jewish nation. You know what David did to Avraham Avinu? You know what he did to him? Anybody know what he did to him? He tested him 10 times. 10 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Every one of those tests, by definition, was impossible to overcome b'derech hateva. The Eibush gives me one of those tests. 100 millions of one of those tests. And I'm failing. I'm fast in my face. I don't understand. If you want Avraham Avinu to be the father of your nation, why are you making it so hard? I don't understand you, Eibush. You want Avraham Avinu to be the father of my nation. Why are you making it hard? What's the answer? Because that's how you become Avraham Avinu. That's how you become. You're whispering again. You're making me nervous. That's how you become Avraham Avinu. And the same is true with Chassidus. When Chassidus comes into the world, the Eibishter wants Chassidus, the Eibishter wants Yidden, and the Eibishter is the biggest problem. I was walking around this morning thinking about the Holocaust. The Eibishter did it. Nobody else could do something so bad. Only the Eibishter. But what are you going to do? It's only one. Hashem is one. Finished. This is the Eibishter. It's one God. He knows what He wants. And we don't do what we want. We do what He tells us. Now, why would I do what He tells me if He's making it hard for me? Why? Because that's what He wants from us. And that's what He wants from Alter Rebbe. So every kitrug is a combination of Kedusha and Klipa. There's somebody who's putting his leg out to make you trip. There's somebody who's putting his leg out to make you trip. It's Klipa. He's able to do it because the Eibishter lets him, or even helps him. And you have to jump over his foot, or fall down, start to cry, and your mommy comes, and she gives you a kiss, and she puts on bacitracin, and she puts on a bandage on your knees, and says, go run. You understand? The Eibishter tells you what to do, then He sends a bad guy to trip you up, he's tried to a bad guy also, and then He gives you a kiss, He washes it off first, you shouldn't get an infection, He puts on bacitracin, He puts on a bandage, go. And He trips you again, This is the story of the Jewish people. Here's the good news and the bad news. Take it any way you want. We're still here. You have no idea how amazing that is. We are still here. Of Tzelacha Solomon. We're still here. We're still here. Why? Because we're Ata v'chatonu mikol ha'amim. But that's why the Kitrugim happened. That's the answer to your question with a little bit of a drama. So the Alter Rebbe goes out of jail and it's Chassidus Chabad. It really is a whole other dimension.
But is that part of things that Hashem does for our own good, or that's just a vested interest?
Where do we end and God begin? Where does it end? Where's the end of God? The beginning of the Jewish people. Where's what's good for Him and not good for us? What's good for us, not good for Him? Where's the line?
Well, we don't exist. So.
Oh, good Ganfet. It's also a truth. What's the answer
we
to
do, because it says in Torah that
so who's right? How can they both be right? It's also right, like the story goes. The answer to your question is only a question on a madrega, which is a separation between what's good for the Eibush and what's good for the Jewish people. And safe call safe, they're both the same thing. They really are both the same thing. Mashiach is coming very, very soon. And then then we're going to win. Then we're going to win. We're going to win. Finish. I'm like, it's worth it. It says in Chumash Rashi that when Mashiach comes, the Goyim are going to say, I thought you were out of your mind to stay loyal to this God. But you were right. I think you're nuts. 3,350 years of tzadus, and you stuck it out. But you were right. We were wrong, you were right. We should have stuck it out. That's what the Mashiach is going to come. That's Haninu Goyim Amei. Haninu Goyim Amei. In this Pasha, Haninu Goyim, that's the second part of a song, yeah? The Goyim are going to say, I can't believe it. We thought you guys were out of your minds. You're holding on to this Eibishter, all it does is make you tzadus. But you're right. It's happening very, very, very soon. And we have no more patience, you understand? We have no more patience. So this is the story. The Alter Rebbe came out of jail, and began to spread Chassidus. And I want to try and explain this to you. Before the Alter Rebbe met the Mesicher Maggid, before he met Chassidus at all, Alter Rebbe's father was a Chazid, Alter Rebbe's mother was a Chazid, Alter Rebbe's uncles were Chassidim, Alter Rebbe's Chassidim, and Alter Rebbe was a Misnagid. Because the Baal Shem Tov said no one's allowed to mention his name. The Alter Rebbe was not allowed to hear the name of the Baal Shem Tov. And when the Baal Shem Tov passed away, he went to the Mesicher Maggid. Before the Alter Rebbe met the Mesicher Maggid, he studied the whole Torah. He studied a lot of Kabbalah. Alter Rebbe did a lot of Kabbalah. And the Alter Rebbe created a new system of learning Kabbalah using the principles of philosophy in Moshel and Nimshel. Kabbalah is very hard to understand. The language is very hard to understand. The form is very hard to understand. And lahavshir dvorim migashmiyusa. And when you read the form in Kabbalah, not to think of the Eibush as having eyebrows and a nose and eyes, to understand that it's all ruchnis is very hard to understand. The Alter Rebbe invented a system of learning Kabbalah based on logic. The central idea to the Alter Rebbe's system of explaining Kabbalah based on logic is the pasuk which you've certainly come across in your learning, Mibisari echeze elaka. You want to understand God, study the human form. Mibisari echeze elaka. You want to understand the Eibush, to study what a person is. Mibisari, from my flesh, I'll see God. Why? Because it says in the Chumash, Nasa Adna b'tzalmeinu kid Moseinu, that man was created in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when you study yourself, you understand Elokus. Now this is very tricky, because last time I checked, we don't believe that Hashem had eyes, or nose, or fingers, or toes, or what have it, right? So of course you guys know this, that when it says Mibisari Echze Elaka, it's going on, we call in our culture, Adam Ha'elyon. Or if those come to my class on Mondays and Thursdays, it's called Atzilus, Adam Ha'elyon, the supernal man, Adam Ha'elyon. The Eibush created us in His image, the way it is, Al-Pi Kabbalah is the image of Adam Atzilus. But you see, you're a person, yeah? You have a mind, you have a heart, you have senses, right? You have a neshama, which is your brain. You have a ruach, which is your heart, and you have a nefesh, which is your liver, and your hands and your feet and your mouth. But you also have a chaya yechida. You also have levels of your neshama, which are above your body. So when you study you don't just study your brain and your heart and your senses. You study also your subconscious and your essence. And the more you study what a person is, the better you're able to understand what godliness is. So Alter Rebbe created a mashal based on this pasuk. So if you want to understand Kabbalah, use the mashal of a person. For those of you who have learned substantial amounts of Chassidus, I think it's a correct statement to make, even though it's a very radical statement to make, that 50% of Chassidus is mashal, and 50% of Chassidus is nimshal. Half of Chassidus is an example, and half of Chassidus is explaining what it's an example to. You don't even realize it's a mashal and a nimshal. Every idea in Kabbalah is explained in Chassidus using mashal of another part of a person. Because we were created b'dugma shel Maila. So the Alter Rebbe created a philosophy which really revolves around explaining what a person is. A Chassidus, not a person based on biology or chemistry or physics or philosophy or psychology. Understanding of what a person is according to Kabbalah. And so many Marei Chassidus, if you've ever learned them, you know this. Talk about what a person is. What Chochmah is by a person. What Bina is by a person. What Re'iyah is, seeing is by a person. What hearing is by a person. What Chesed is by a person, the right hand. What Gevurah is by a person, the left hand. And says, if you want to understand God, if you want to understand godliness, you have to study the human form. And Alter Rebbe created a philosophy, a logical system that allows us to understand Kabbalah. And Alter Rebbe created this. And Alter Rebbe was the master of this. Alter Rebbe did an amazing job. He gave us so much material. And all the Rabbeim after the Alter Rebbe have built their Torah, have built their Chassidus, have built their Maimorim on the Teiros and the Chassidus and the Maimorim with the Alter Rebbe. Saying, if you want to understand godliness, study man. And it's such a logical system, such a good philosophical system. It works so good, the Nefesh HaBahamas can understand. But there's one very, very critical rule. Only he's allowed to tell you how you have to understand it. If you learn a Maimon Chassidus, which tells them about the human form, and you say, wait, then science says different. And for the Gemara, don't look in science. Don't look in science. You can only look in Torah. Because Torah has its version of what a person is, and ultimately Torah is right. So when the biology says different, and the chemistry says different, and the physics says different, you can't make up your own mashal. Only the Alter Rebbe. In other words, in Chassidus, not only is the nimshal Torah, the mashal is Torah. The mashal of Mebisari Echlaka, understanding what a person is, understanding what a person's right hand is, that a person's left hand is, that a person walks bipedally. I always give this example when I speak to teenagers who are very worried about proof. Scientifically, okay, I'm going to say a bad word so nobody should listen, okay? Put your hands over your ears. Yeah. From the perspective of evolution, Rahman al-Islam, it makes no sense that any creature should walk on two legs. Bipedalism. Google it. Don't believe it. Look it up. They believe that we evolved from monkeys. There's midrashim that imply that monkeys evolved from people. It's it's reverse evolution. When you eat great apes, they were once people, they were to punish them, but they became the apes. There's a medrash like that, just for fun, okay, just to make you nervous. So if you believe that animals walked on 4 legs, and then they raised themselves in 2 legs, and they have all kinds of stupid explanations about the earth cooling and not being enough trees and open grassland, blah, 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 blah. One of the most unlikely phenomena in nature is to walk on 2 feet. You know why? The heaviest part of your body is the farthest away from the ground. And in nature, the heaviest part of your body is supposed to be closest to the ground. One of the most difficult things for a person to do is to walk on 2 feet and not fall. You're carrying a pendulum. The heaviest part is here. So our brain spends a lot of space, as they call it in evolutionary terms, walking upright and not toppling over. Because in nature, if you want to be balanced, put the center of gravity close to the ground. Our center of gravity is further away from the ground. Walking upright makes no sense. The only reason it makes sense is because God did it. It didn't happen from evolution. The Eibishter made us walk upright. And when you study man, the way it's explained in Chassidus, beginning with the Hayom Yom, which Hayom Yom? The Eibishter created all animals to look at the earth. And the Eibishter made human beings to walk upright. So they should see the sky. As they said in Hayom Yom. It's not a maimah, it's not a sikha, it's Hayom Yom. Because they should always remember the Eibishter. The Eibishter made human beings to walk on 2 feet and look at the heavens. Because we're bedugma shel maila. That's what all the kus is. And we created in his image. So the Alter Rebbe invented the mashal and the nimshal. He created the mashal of understanding a person. If you study Chassidus, you see Chassidus, half of Chassidus is a mashal. And most of the mashal of Chassidus are about people. The mashal about a king, the mashal about a teacher, the mashal about a parent. All of these mashalim are realistic descriptions of what human beings are that explain the meanness of a person, the essence of a person, the relationships of people, and it all helps us understand the lakus, because we were created in a supernal image. You understand? And the Alter Rebbe created the logic for this. The Alter Rebbe created a way of explaining it using common sense philosophy. And the Alter Rebbe was a master. The Alter Rebbe's ability to create mashalim is not normal. Nobody learns Alter Rebbe's maimonim except for the Likkutei Tenterei. Alter Rebbe's 2,000 maimonim. The vast majority of Alter Rebbe's maimonim sit in the shelf, nobody opens them and looks at them. They're very simple. They're easy in the middle. A mashal, half a maimah is a mashal. Everything is explained using a person's goof. And it allows you to understand Kabbalah. The Alter Rebbe did this before he came to the Mizitcha Magid, before he came to Chassidus. Then later, when he became a Rebbe, he used this technique, which he had introduced as a teenager, to incorporating it into it, not just Limud Kabbalah, but also the Limud Chassidus. And that's called Chabad, Chochma Bina Das. In plain, fagrepte English, it means all you need is a brain. You need a soul, a brain. You have a working mind, and you're not lazy, and you will understand hard. The Alter Rebbe is going to explain godliness to you on such a level that it'll actually make sense. This is called Chabad, Chochma Bina Das. And of course, if something good comes into the world, what happens? Everybody fights against it. The Misnagdim fought against it. The Chassidim fought against it. The Goyim fought against it. Who didn't fight against it? Everyone fought against it. And one of the strongest criticisms of Chabad Chassidus came from the Peilish, from others, not from Misnagdim, not from Goyim, from other Chassidim. And they used to say that Chassidus Chabad got carried away with itself. Why? Because the whole point of Chassidus is heart. The whole point of Chassidus is fire. And Chassidus Chabad, you're so busy using your brain, you're so caught up in your brain that it doesn't come down to the heart. So they came to the Chassidim, the Misnagdim, the Peilish, came to the Lubavitch Chassidim, Chabad Chassidim, and said, they gave a mashal. It's been to the same base of Rebbe. Peilish Chassidus is like burning a piece of paper. They'll burn a piece of paper. It takes a split second, yeah? It makes a big fire and then it disappears. But at least for 1 second you have fire. Maybe you don't even have time to have heat, but you have fire, yeah? Chabad Chassidus, he said, is like having a gun, a brand new gun, and 250 years ago guns were a new invention. and has everything perfect. The gun is clean, the gears have been checked, everything is in the right place, the bullet is in the chamber. The bullet is in the chamber. Everything is perfect. You're just missing the piece of flint. And they say in Yiddish, a fink. You know what a fink means in Yiddish? A funk, anybody speak Yiddish? A funk? A spark. To ignite the powder. To explode the bullet. That it should fly out of the gun. So they said to the Lubavitch Chassidim, the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim, by you everything is perfect, but you don't have the fire. In other words, you have everything about Chassidus except the point. The point of Chassidus is the fire. And Chabad is so fancied up with philosophy and limud and misholim and nimshal. You're so busy studying Alakus that you have no time to develop a relationship with Alakus. This was the taina that the Poilisha had to the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim. So once upon a time there was a Fabrengen, and the Chassidim was sitting around, and some Poilisha guy was harassing them. The Chabad, what is kafink? What is kafink? Fink is a Polish in Yiddish. Funk, a spark. There's no spark. Chabad is everything, but you're missing the point. The point is the spark. And the Tzemach Tzedek was sitting at that Fabreng. Tzemach Tzedek was Alter Rebbe's grandson. And he was the Mali Mekoyim Kochi. Tzemach Tzedek was a big tzaddik, he was a big god. And the Tzemach Tzedek said, Eshtei toch im Posuk, V'yadaita hayoyim v'asheveis alevavecha. Does anybody know Hebrew? V'yadaita? You should know. Hayoim, v'ashevoisa, bring it back, elavavecha. So the Tzemach Tzedek asks a simple question. Where should the word hayoim be? Either in the beginning or the end. Either hayoim v'yadaita v'yitalavecha, or v'yadaita v'ashevoisa v'avecha hayoim. The hayoim is in the middle. You should know today and bring it onto your heart. When? So Tzemach Tzedek said tomorrow. It's worth to learn Chassidus Chabad today, even if you don't get the fire, till Mashiach comes. Tzemach Tzedek's answer. Now you have to learn Chassidus Chabad and understand in Chochmah Bina Vadas. Because when you learn Chassidus, you're bringing the Eibishter into your brain. What about the fire? The fire is very important. The fire is very the point. But if the fire doesn't happen Hayoim, today, even if the fire happens tomorrow, and tomorrow means after